Everyone loves a good backstory. I think you think of a Hollywood actor, a politician, whomever. Everyone loves that backstory. I've heard you've got a great backstory. Maybe tell the audience a bit about how you came into this whole world of investing.
Yeah. So, I've been at Fidelity for 15 years, but it started a long time ago. So I grew up in a small town in Ontario, kind of between St. Mary's and Stratford. And, I come from a farming family. So, at the time my mom was working in a cafe. And every Saturday morning, my dad would take my sister and I down to the cafe. And, he'd get a coffee and I would read the sports pages. And at some point, along the way, I went too far because I got to the business section.
Right.
And, you get to the business section, and at that time, the stock tables are at the back. And I start looking at stock tables, and I said, like, what is this? And my dad said, well, it's the stock market, And so he started explaining to me, like, okay, you can buy a piece of a company. And, I start looking at all the companies, and it's like, okay, Coca-Cola, Wrigley, Callaway Golf. I think some of the sports teams were public at that time. And I was like, oh my God, as a 12-year-old, right. You're thinking, I can own the candy company. This sounds like something I'm interested in. So I started reading about it, as a 12, 13-year-old kid. And, the first book I read actually ended up being One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. So,
a bit
early Fidelity influence.
Right.
And, from there, just kind of, went through school and started at Fidelity.
Well, that's pretty awesome. So you started as a research analyst, is that correct?
Yep.
So 15 years ago or so?
15 years. I started as an intern in Boston with the company. So, 2 internships. Started with the company in 2009 and on the Canadian research team. So as an analyst. So, classic path through the Fidelity research system. You start as an analyst, you cover multiple sectors, and over time you kind of gain experience and hopefully move into a position where you can become a portfolio manager.
One thing that I find really interesting about Fidelity, on top of all the training and everything, they develop ways or maybe work with the person to figure out their investing style. We've got Dan Dupont on downside protection and Mark on, positive change and things like that, Mark Schmale.
Yep.
How did you come to find your style?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point, right? Is Fidelity is, you learn what works, but more importantly, what works for you.
Right.
So when you have this broad spectrum, right, you have Dan, who's over on the value side, Steve McMillan, who is more of a GARP investor, Hugo Lavallee, who's, contrarian investor, and then Mark, who's more of a kind of growth investor. You get to see what works. And, I think you get to pick and choose parts of that process and iterate, right? I think one of the things you learn is you learn through mistakes.
Right.
And when you have, the great thing about being a Fidelity is you've got mentors. And when you have mentors, you get to learn through their mistakes, which really accelerates your development curve, right? So I think over time, you find your style, you find your voice. And I think we're all good at different things. There's multiple ways to make money. There is no single way to make money.
Right.
I think that's the great thing that you can find at Fidelity.
Okay, so let's fast forward to 2019. You've had a great tenure as an analyst. You've been researching different sectors, understanding how they work, their dynamics and things. Yep. Now you're tapped on the shoulder. Idea for a new global small cap fund, the Global Small Cap Opportunities Fund, which you co-manage right now with Chris Meljazinski. Tell me how that came to be and how does that fit into your style? Why you? Why that fund?
Yeah, Chris and I launched the fund in November of 2019, and the backstory was kind of before that, right? Andrew Marchese, our chief investment officer, came to Chris and I in the middle of 2018, actually, and said, we think there's an opportunity here. You two have been working together for, call it 10 years. You look at the market in the same way. Your style consistent, but we had taken divergent career paths, right? So I had kind of focused on certain sectors, so industrials, right. Tech, healthcare. Chris had done consumer, mining, telco, financials, right? There was no overlap,
right?
Which ended up, it was perfect complement, right? So two of us, you combine us, style consistent, and we've got completely divergent backgrounds. So we can go out, we have a global opportunity set, and we can look at, all the stocks under the sun. I think we almost 100% sector coverage as analysts. So the point being, big universe, and then go and leverage Fidelity's investment research advantage in the small cap space, which is more inefficient. Right. And the whole point is, let's find inefficiently priced stocks put them in a concentrated portfolio, and really generate some nice returns for clients.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's great. It's great to see this your full story arc there,
Yeah.
and the fund is doing very, very well, which is great. Now let's talk about work is a big part of your life, of course.
Absolutely.
But outside of work, what interests you?
What interests me? I mean, I've got 2 kids, so
you have no time.
5 and 6,
Right.
so that takes up a lot of time
Right.
outside of work. But I think I kind of got the philosophy of healthy body, healthy mind. So a lot of my time ends up being I run, which I think you trail run as well. So I started running trails maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I find, one, it's a good way to get outside.
Yes.
But I find, it's also one of the only things I do where I have to be completely present in the moment, right? There's no distractions. You can't think too far ahead. You can't be thinking about the past, because if you do, you're, going to fall off a rock. Right. So, I love doing that. And obviously, spending time with kids. I read a lot of history, a lot of books. Tend to have 2 books on the go at all times. So, tend to read a lot of financial history, a lot of business history, a lot of military history. Right. And I think, I often say, for me, a lot of investing is studying the past, observing the present, trying to anticipate the future. And I think if you don't read history, like nothing's new under the sun. Right. Yeah. Everything's cyclical and nothing's new. Right. You just haven't gone back far enough. So I tend to read a lot of market history, and that tends to inform a lot of what I do from an investment perspective as well.
That's awesome. Well, Connor, thank you so much for being here on Behind the Numbers with us.
Great to be here.